What's up, guys? It's Danny from the Lassercast. Hope you're having a great Monday morning. It's almost February, and as February comes, Pete and I are going to turn ourselves back to our old faithful Shudder, and we are going to be covering loads of great stuff coming to Shudder in February. And coming on February 1st is a Boris Karloff collection. They're putting some of the Legends classic films on there, from Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, The Black Cat, The Old Dark House, you name it. And to prep for that, on January 27th, they released a documentary called Boris Karloff, the Man Behind the Monster, written by Ron McCloskey and Thomas Hamilton, directed by Thomas Hamilton. And I don't have enough words to say about how much I enjoyed this documentary. This is the kind of documentary that could appeal to, it could appeal to horror fans. That goes without saying. If you're a horror movie fan and you want a peek into the life and career of one of the legit all-time greats, a Mount Rushmore of the horror industry, Boris Karloff, this is it. This is a 99-minute, all-inclusive look at that man's life and career. But also, this is for film fans. You don't have to be a horror fan to appreciate Frankenstein, the 1931 James Whale film. You don't have to be a horror fan to know the name of Boris Karloff. They make a point right at the beginning of this documentary to bring up the Grinch, and how for an entire generation of children who then grew up to show the Grinch to their kids and their grandkids, Boris Karloff is the voice of the Grinch. And it's amazing when you think about that, because again, this documentary, it can appeal to your horror fans, and it's on Shudder, and of course horror fans are going to watch it. But if you're a cinephile, if you're somebody who just enjoys classic cinema or film history, this is a documentary that I absolutely feel that you should watch. Did you know that Boris Karloff's name was William Henry Pratt, and that he was of Anglo-Indian heritage? You get all this amazing stuff about his childhood and his upbringing, how he started his career as a stage actor in Western Canada, and basically moved to California and just kind of walked on to sets as an actor. You get a lot of images and scenes from films way early in his career, back in the silent era of the 20s. And one of the things they mention is how from being a stage actor, he was much more ready to adapt from the silent era to the talkie period, whereas many other actors struggled because they had never spoken on film. That, the sound, Singing in the Rain gives you a very great perspective on that, and what it was like trying to transition from silent to talkies. Of course, we get into his stint at Universal and the James Whale, Jack Pierce combo that helped make Boris Karloff the name that we know today, from Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, The Mummy. They talk about, the little things that you would never think about, like when they talk about the makeup, the infamous monster makeup for the Frankenstein monster. They talk about how Jack Pierce sculpted the makeup around Karloff's actual face so that you see Karloff's facial features through the makeup, which they bring up is why when Karloff stepped down from the role and other actors were brought in to fill the role as the monster, it never really looked the same. And it allowed him to really kind of have ownership over that role. Even to this day, when people think of the Frankenstein monster, they think of Boris Karloff. It goes without saying. They bring up the Old Dark House, one of my favorites. Great, the Black Cat, another. Probably, maybe this is a sin to say, you know, Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein aren't my favorite of the early Boris Karloff films, but the Black Cat, definitely my favorite one of those. Absolutely love it. The first Boris Karloff, Bela Lugosi collaboration, they are both fantastic in that film. They even show clips of The Mask of Fu Manchu from 1932, which, my goodness, you want to talk about movies that could not be made today? Wow. That was a bad one. But tons of great backstory. Karloff and Lugosi being super important in the beginning of the Screen Actors Guild during the Great Depression and during the 30s, making sure that actors were paid a fair wage and that the studios were not allowed to mess with actors. They talk about how, you know, they have tons of talking head interviews here. Predominantly featured is Guillermo del Toro. He refers to the Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein movies as like religion for him, and how seeing those films was akin to a religious experience, a religious awakening for him as a youngster. They have Joe Dante is featured prominently. The late Dick Miller, the late Peter Bogdanovich are shown as well. They even go into, again, this is where, you know, forgetting the horror for a second, but like the cinema history and really just like the history, technological history, the American history, really. Karloff going from, we already said, from the silent era to the talkies, but then transitioning to television and horror films, the universal classic horror films becoming known to a brand new generation of teenagers and kids in the 1950s on this new device called television. They bring up shock theater and how all of these networks would get all the Universal horror films like one at a time, and they would just be able to play them on TV. And they had horror hosts, so it's like, you know, here we're talking about Shudder. In a couple weeks, there's going to be a new Joe Bob / Drive-In Valentine's Day special. You know, horror hosts like Joe Bob Today and Elvira. Well, the generation before them got started with shock theater in the 50s, showing the Karloff Universal horror films. And then watching as Karloff would go back to Broadway, not go back to Broadway, would actually go to Broadway in Arsenic and Old Lace, and how he returned, he would go on television and do more of these Arsenic and Old Lace live performances. So here's a guy who, from silent to classic Universal monster films, stage, on and off Broadway, live television, the man mastered all art forms. They go into how much he hated the fact that he was on This Is Your Life, and they like surprised him with all of these people from his past, and he was not ready for it, and he didn't like it. And it's really fascinating watching Karloff react to this, except when they brought Jack Pierce on, because he loved Jack Pierce, obviously. February 2nd is the anniversary of Karloff's death. He died in 1969, complications from emphysema. His daughter is shown in this, and she is very well-spoken, talks, especially at the end, about what the horror fans mean to her dad's memory, and how she's able to enjoy her dad's memory even more because of the love horror fans have for Boris Karloff and his work. There's also a really funny story I won't spoil, but if you know anything about the Roger Corman film The Terror, This is like one of those all-time just crazy productions, typical Roger Corman. He's like piecing movies together. He had Boris Karloff for 2 extra days after Karloff filmed The Raven for him, and he kept him on just to film random scenes that he would incorporate later on into the movie The Terror. And they have people talking about this and how nobody knew what The Terror was about, and it's really funny listening to that. Corman is in this as well, and it was great. I had such a blast watching this. I'm so excited for these Boris Karloff films to come back. Somewhere in my collection, I'll find it, but somewhere in my collection I have, I see it up there, a combo of the Universal Monsters films, including Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein and The Mummy. But to have all of them on Shudder, where I don't have to reach up and pull stuff off and plug in the DVD and the Blu-ray player, to have movies like The Black Cat and The Old Dark House on there, I really want Charlotte to watch some of these films. You know, it's great watching the horror films that I grew up with her, and getting her to appreciate, you know, the Freddys and the Michael Myers and the Jasons and all those movies that I grew up with. But, you know, part of being a horror fan and part of being in the horror fam is sharing the films of generations past with new generations, and to be able to share, you know, these classics. And you know, the best part about these classics is they're really short movies. Like even the original Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein are barely an hour to 70 minutes. So it's not a lot to ask of my now, 11-year-old daughter. Hey, sit down, watch this black and white movie with me. I genuinely think she's going to enjoy it. I can't wait to rewatch The Black Cat. It's one of my favorites. But if you have Shudder, go and check out Boris Karloff, The Man Behind the Monster, one of the best documentaries they have on there. And I think it pairs very nicely with another documentary that's on there, Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror. Again, they're both, you know, they both dig into the classics. They both appeal to horror fans, but also cinema fans, and they go into film history, and I think there's a lot of important stuff in both. Pete and I are going to be covering a lot of new releases on Shudder. We know that we're going to be covering the new film Slapface, which will be out on February 3rd, and we have a bunch more. There's a ton of cool stuff coming. Battle Royale is coming to Shudder. Tales from the Crypt Demon Knight. We'll do something special for Valentine's Day. We'll be covering Joe Bob's Valentine's Day special with Darcy this year. I think it's called The Heartbreak Trailer Park, which is just perfect. And you can go and check out some of the reviews we have up there now. Charlotte and I just reviewed Ready or Not from 2019. Pete and I have a long review, spoiler-filled discussion about the new Scream film. Charlotte and I reviewed the whole Scream franchise. So go check those out, and we will see you very soon on the Lacercast.